everyone. Welcome. Kalisperasas. Good evening. Welcome. It's so good to have you all with us again this evening for part 2 in our wonderful new series on the synagogues of Greece. My name is Ethan Marcus. I'm the Director of Communications for the Sephardic Jewish Brotherhood of America. I'm also a proud member of Kehillah Kedoshah Yanana Synagogue and Museum, our partner for this evening with the Sephardic Brotherhood for this wonderful new program. Just a reminder, this program is through our new Sephardic Digital Academy initiative, a whole host of an online database of Sephardic learning on Greek Jewish history, on Ladino language, on Sephardic cooking, and a whole lot more, including Torah and Halakha. If you're interested in learning more about our programs and our other classes, please check out our website, sephardicbrotherhood.com/Sephardic Digital Academy. I want to take a moment and thank our wonderful sponsor for this 3-part series, Mizrahi Realty and Mr. Sion Mizrahi. Thank him very much for his support. And remind you all that these types of programs through Kehillah Kedoshah Yanana and the Sephardic Brotherhood, all nonprofit initiative, we do rely on your support, especially at this difficult time. Whatever you can give, however big or small, is always appreciated. And that, keep in mind, we're launching our very special Giving Tuesday and end of year campaign starting tomorrow, both for KKJ and the Sephardic Brotherhood. If you're interested in giving, please consider it. We really, really appreciate your support. Now, to introduce the woman of the hour this evening, our dear friend, Marcia Haddad Ikonomopoulos, who is the museum director of Kehillah Kedoshah Yanana Synagogue and Museum. And she also serves as president of the Association of Friends of Greek Jewry and as on the board of directors of the Lower East Side Preservation Initiative. Marcia, whenever you're ready, please unmute and you can begin.
Great. Good evening. Kalisperasas. I'm overwhelmed with all the responses I got from the last program. I want to thank the Sephardic Brotherhood of America, Kehillah Kedoshah Yanana Synagogue and Museum, Ethan Marcus, as always, and Zion Mizrahi. In addition, thanks to all those who contacted me with glowing praise, but you can't live by praise alone. So I want to give a special thanks for the constructive criticism that I got from Sam Gruber, and I promise Sam to look more into the screen so you can see my makeup that I put on today. Okay. A special thanks to Vasilis Ritsalaios, who has shared his valuable research on the Jewish community of Cavalla and other communities in Thraki. And finally, a continuous thanks to Bob Befford, who has always shared his knowledge and photos over the years. In addition, I'd like to thank those people for whom their family stories were so important, especially Louise Raska, who shared photos and stories of her family from Cavalla, Larissa, and Trikona. We're using... Where am I now? Am I sharing?
No, you need to share screen.
Where's my share screen? Oh, over here. Okay. Okay, and it's all set to go. Okay, great. As with last time, we're using... Why am I not doing anything here? Okay, Ethan, why is it not moving?
You can just click the arrows.
That's what I'm doing, but it's not going. Okay, now it's going. Okay. As last time, I'm using the map of Greece, modern Greece, as it is today, even though politically over the course of the centuries, this has not always been what Greece was. In fact, Greece was really not completed the way it is now until 1946, when the Dodecanese became part of modern Greece. In part 2, we're going to go to different areas in Greece, areas that, interesting enough, are not usually visited by tourists, and yet they're some of the most beautiful areas in Greece. We're going to go first to the farthest part of northeastern Greece, known as Thrace or Thraki, and Eastern Macedonia. We'll be going to 3 cities in Macedonia, Eastern Macedonia, Saris, Cavalla, and Drama, and then we'll be going to a score of cities that go throughout Thraki. The reason I'm using this particular part of Greece is these were all under the Bulgarian zone of occupation, which those of you who know me is a very sore spot for me. If I admonish them during the course of this presentation, I haven't admonished them enough. This is, you can, okay. So we're going to be going to these cities, seeing the synagogues in Thraki and Eastern Macedonia. Okay. Pictures don't lie. The Bulgarians could cop out of what they did in the Bulgarian zone of occupation, insisting on going to their standard story about how they saved all their Jews. True, the Jews that were living physically in what was then Bulgaria were not deported. Whether they were saved by the Bulgarian nation is a whole other story. What we do know is it did not stop the Bulgarians from coming into areas such as southern Yugoslavia, cities like Monastir, which I lost many of my family, and eastern part of Greece in Thraki. Cavalla is where my family was living and where they were deported. This picture here, it screams to me. I mean, look at the innocence on the mother's face and her daughter, not knowing that in a few days they'll be sent to Treblinka and to death. This is the port of Cavalla, taken, of course, probably about 150 years ago. This is what it looks like now. This is the former synagogue of Cavalla, and this is the cemetery. There are whole background stories here that I have to share with you. I first visited Cavalla in the early 1980s, trying to find out, after I learned that I had lost family there, in addition to the family that I lost in Thessaloniki. I found out from my aunt Stella, who was the bearer of the Russo part of the family, and the story there. I went through the cemetery with a man who has now passed away, a man by the name of Sabi Cimino, who kept a record and meticulously wrote down the name of everyone that he knew from Cavalla and submitted it to Yad Vashem. I went with Sabi into the cemetery to look for my family's tombstones, and I remember we had to walk quite a distance because they were in the back of the cemetery. When I went a couple of years ago with my friend Louise, she also felt that she could not find many of her family's tombstones. But when we went there, and this is, by the way, due to the excellent work, this part of the cemetery, of Victor Venuzio, who is the titular head of the Jewish community of Cavalla, which really doesn't exist anymore. But he took it upon himself to clear away parts of the cemetery and to actually designate in plaques the names of those that were buried there and put it into a database. Louise couldn't find many of her relatives. I could find hardly any of my relatives. My feeling is that they're all back here because I remember walking a great distance. I found out through my research that there was actually an older cemetery that is no longer in existence, but that wasn't the one I was in. I was in this one here. This reads in memory of those who in 1943 were abducted and unjustly murdered. It really doesn't read right here because it says 386 family members. It was actually members of 386 families of the Jewish community of Cavalla, victims of Nazi bestiality. This is the tombstone of Flora Jasmino Cohn. And when I went there, Sabi was my first guide into the cemetery. And then Sabi's son-in-law, David Cohn, opened them up for me when we went back at a later date. Flora, his wife, would help her father take care of the cemetery in Cavalla, even though she was physically living in Drama. And she told her husband that when she died, she wanted to be buried in the Jewish cemetery in Cavalla, and that she is. These are some of the newer graves here up front. And this picture here is the family of Rabbi Judah Azuvi, who was the great-grandfather of Louise. This was taken in Cavalla around 1910, we think. The whole family, with the exception of one son, who wound up in Paris, and then in Israel, I believe. Louise, I'm sure you'll correct me afterwards. They all went to Treblinka. This is the Holocaust Memorial that was put up in 2015, and I paid a visit with my group. If you come to Greece with me, you know, you go where I go. You have no choice in the matter, really. This is in memory of my family. Of course, it's in memory of all the Jews that perished from Cavalla, but it gives me an opportunity to read their names, which I don't usually have. So this is in memory of Hannah Russo, her children, Bechor, Isaac, Menachem, and Leah, their spouses, Kaduna, Louisa, and Lucia, and her grandchildren, Samuel, Natan, Benzion, Rosa, Avram, Samuel, Shalom, Sabbatai, Joya, Moshe, and Anula, and Rosa. This picture haunts me. You're looking at a picture, and how many people can really say they could look at a picture of their family, a relative, as they were being led shortly to their death? This is Rabbi Judah Azuvi being taken by the Bulgarians to go onto a barge that will take him across the Danube, final destination Treblinka. He was in his 80s at the time. Couldn't he just live out his life in peace? This is a group of teachers of the Jewish school in Cavalla. Now, a little bit about the life of the Jews in Cavalla. Like most of the communities in this area, in Thraki, they were involved somehow in the tobacco industry, either in the cultivation or the production, and certainly the sale. In fact, ironically, the Jews in Cavalla, when they were rounded up for the deportation, were kept in one of the tobacco warehouses. The community initially started out, as it did throughout most of Thraki, of Ashkenazi Jews that came from Hungary, came down south into this area. And then the Sephardim added to the community and soon overtook the Ashkenazi neighbors. So the community was predominantly Sephardic. Moving on to Drama now, and this is another colorful town, not too far away from Cavalla, with the cobblestone streets, the Byzantine Fortress, and a lake. This is the tobacco factory in Drama, and again, most of the Jews here in Drama worked in the production and cultivation and packaging of tobacco. As an interesting aside, the Ashkenazi Tobacco Company, where so many of the Greek Jews, when they came to New York, worked, was founded by two brothers, the Ashkenazi brothers, who were originally from Cavalla, and then went to Egypt to learn the fine art of cigarette making. This is the Holocaust Memorial in Drama. We will not forget. Remember and do not forget. And these are the remains of, there are two Jewish cemeteries in Drama. The old cemetery, which has about 70 graves, the oldest dating to 1885. And this is what most of the cemetery looks like now. And this is the new cemetery, it's 143 graves, the oldest dating to 1912. So it appears that in addition to the tremendous losses during the Holocaust, those that survived afterwards, such as Jan Mizrahi and his family, left, and there were no Jews. There's one Jew, really one Jewish family. David Cohen lives in Drama. This is also part of the new cemetery now. The only thing that remains from the synagogue in Drama that was destroyed by the Nazis is this light bulb. That's all we have. Moving on to a community series, which most people never visit, myself included. I have to say I was there once. It's really interesting, not my favorite place, but interesting. It has one of the old-fashioned cobblestone streets leading up, so the mountains in the background. This here is the girls' school, Jewish school in Saris. What really, in addition to the tremendous losses in the Holocaust, what really led to the demise of the community is when the railroad line that was going from Salonika to Istanbul decided not to make a stop in Saris, and therefore the commerce of the city suffered tremendously. This is the Jewish cemetery, and all that's here is about 7 broken tombstones, and you can't read anything on them. Again, this community, as with the community of Drama and Cavalla, the Jews were rounded up in March of 1943 by the Bulgarians, handed over to the Germans as they crossed across the Danube at the port of Lom, and then wound up in Treblinka, where they would perish. There was no choice at Treblinka. You didn't have one line that went to work and one line that went to the gas chambers. Everybody went to the gas chambers. Xanthi, which is a beautiful, colorful town, very close to the Bulgarian border. These are some of the streets in Xanthi. I had such a good time here. Look at those beautiful buildings, and most of them you can go B&B, bed and breakfast now, where you can rent rooms in these old picturesque buildings. This is the Jewish Quarter, the old Jewish Quarter, which was not in existence when I visited there. This is from an old photograph. And this was what remains of the Synagogue of Xanthi. And this, next time I go back there, this is where I have to stay. This is a mansion owned by Isaac Daniel, who was a tobacco merchant and now is a bed and breakfast. So you can actually stay in the house. And I went inside. It's absolutely beautiful inside. This is the Jewish cemetery in Xanthi. Now, this is what haunts me. Look at the cemetery. Look how beautifully it's kept up. There is not one Jew living in Xanthi. The cemetery has never been desecrated. I guess it's kept up by family or distant relatives that come to tend it. I asked there, and no one seemed to know who would take care of the cemetery. But in comparison to some of the other cemeteries we saw, especially what's left of the cemetery in Drama and in Saris, this cemetery is beautiful. We're now moving on. Before I leave, of course, the life of the Jews in Xanthi was really pretty much like the life of the Jews in the other cities in Fraki. What's interesting is, in addition to tobacco for smoking, they also raised cannabis and dealt in opium. So it was a very happy community. This is Komatini we're going to now. And this is halfway between Xanthi and Alexandrupali. And tobacco industry, again, was the most important industry. They have these delightful little squares where even today, each square specializes in something. Like one square may have all fruit vendors. Another one may have clothing. And at one time, it was also the tobacco merchants. This is a former tobacco factory over here. And this is the former synagogue of Komotini. Again, the population was initially Jews that came, Ashkenazi Jews from Hungary. And then there were Jews that came, the Sephardic Jews, when they came in. This is all that's left of the synagogue. That empty plot that you see over here. It was torn down. I didn't get to see the actual building. So at the beginning of the 1980s, it was already torn down. This is actual photograph of the roundup. This is the roundup of the Jews from Komotini, and this is a young girl who was deported. I only know her first name, Luna. And this here is the Holocaust Memorial in memory of the Jews of Komotini who were deported in 1943 during the Holocaust by the German Bulgarian occupiers. Alexandrupali, if you're ever planning to go to Thraki, this is where you start. You'd fly into Alexandrupali, and it's a delightful little port city. You can sit on the port and eat the local delicacy, which is caviar, and take in the scenery before you get on the train and you travel west to cover the rest of the cities that are in Thraki. This is the remains of the cemetery of Alexandrupali, 20 existing graves, the oldest dating back to 1863. Again, the same history in the Bulgarian zone of occupation, deported by the Bulgarians, most of them engaging in some aspect of the tobacco industry, although many also dealt in textiles. And this is the Holocaust Memorial that's in Alexandrupali. Finally, the last spot in Thrace, in Thraki, is Didymatiko. And the one distinction here is it was in the Germans. The Germans had the authority there, not the Bulgarians. They kept this because of the close proximity to Turkey, and they felt, rightly so, that many Jews would try to escape into Turkey, so they wanted to have a way of blocking it off. It's a very colorful town, old Byzantine fortress, the red tiled, the use of the red tiles on the top of these houses here, besides being attractive looking, it keeps the heat in during the winter and it keeps the heat out during the summer. A very fascinating story took place in Didymatiko. There was an exhibit at the Jewish Museum a couple of years back called The Good Shepherds. And they talked about men of religion, priests and rabbis, who did something special to help those that were being deported. In most instances, they could not prevent the deportation, but they definitely offered tender, loving care. And that's why they were called the Good Shepherds. This is Joachim Sigelas, who was the Metropolitan Bishop of, Didymatiko. And we have testimony, which I'm going to try to find here in my notes because it's very moving. It was written in a book that was published by Marcos Nakum. It's out of publication now, which it should not be. There are some really very special things in the book. Bear with me one moment here. Okay, Marcos Nakun, the name of the book is Birkenau, The Camp of Death. It was published in 1991 in Thessaloniki. English, there's an English translation. We have it in our library. And this is the testimony that Marcos gave about the Bishop Joachim Sigelas. At this moment, supposedly by coincidence, the bishop, with his great bravery that never abandoned him, walked through the Jewish neighborhood. Mind you, the Jews were being rounded up by the Germans then. No one has any illusions about the true purpose of his stroll. The Jews understand that he has come into the city to bid them farewell and show his support. Many of them, in a gesture of thanks, kiss his hand for the last time. There were many testimonies about what a gentleman he was. He knew that he would probably never see any of these people again, but he wanted them to leave the city with some feelings of humanity. This is an actual picture taken of the Jews of Didymatiko as they're being led out of the city, going to the railroad where they will be taken to Auschwitz-Birkenau, because that was the camp of choice of the Germans, while Treblinka was the camp of choice of the Bulgarians. This is a beautiful mansion of one of the wealthy members of the community, Eliezer Gibre, and he was a silk merchant. And these are the remains of the Jewish cemetery of Didymatiko. The tombstones are very interesting, and most of them are still legible. Now we're going to jump. Those of you who have visited Greece know it's not very easy to very often travel from one part of Greece to another. I remember one time I thought I was going to take a quick hop and a jump and go from Mykonos to Milos. It took me 2 days and 3 ships. But we are going to go over now to Thessaly. And this is really the breadbasket of Greece. It's surrounded by mountains and a fertile valley. And this is where corn and wheat and rice and many of the crops in Greece, including fruit, are grown. It also is the home to 3 cities with major Jewish presence: Volos, Trikona, and Larissa. The Jewish presence here goes back to the 1st century of the Common Era, if not earlier. And these are remains of tombstones that were found not far from the city of Volos. And this one over here has on it, in addition to the menorah, there are doves. The doves, scholars feel, were not there for peace. They were there to express the fact that this was a tombstone of someone who was far from home in the diaspora. By the way, Zenet Batino, who is the museum director of the Jewish Museum of Greece in Athens, has recently published a fantastic book through the museum documenting so many of these finds with Jewish tombstones where the inscriptions are written in Greek. This is an overview of Volos. Volos is on the water at the foothills of the of Pelion. And these are some old photos. I love the old photos. This is the port. You know, Volos is right on the water. According to legend, this was the port where Jason and the Argonauts set sail in search for the Golden Fleece. And there's actually a replica of the Argo in the port of Volos. And this here on the right is a commercial street in the city where there were many Jewish shops. This is a very old lithograph of Volos, and you can see some of the magnificent houses. They really don't exist anymore. You know, there were major earthquakes in Volos, and so much of this old architecture was lost. Again, the port, and I love this. The train came to Volos. Well, it really came to Volos because it went right through the main part of the city. So you had no trouble getting the train. It's not that way now. Now there's a separate station that you have to go to. We have here the Metropolitan Bishop, Joachim. And this is a picture of the bombing by the Germans of the city of Volos. I'm going to talk in a little while about Joachim and his role in saving most of the Jewish population of Volos. You know, throughout Thessaly, the statistics are very different from other parts of Greece. By the way, the greatest percentage of losses in any place in Greece is in the Bulgarian zone of occupation, where 98, 99% of the Jews perished. Salonika, of course, has 96%, Yana 91%. When you get into Thessaly, in most communities, it was the reverse. In Volos, only 26% of the Jews of Volos perished in the Holocaust. And this is the way throughout most of Thessaly, and it has to do really with the courage of the moral courage of Greek Orthodox Christians who took in their Jewish neighbors. When World War II started for Greece on the Albanian front, there were those from Volos who fought and died, Jews, on the Albanian front, and there were Jewish women from Volos who worked as nurses, tending those who were injured. This is a picture of the hospital in Volos, and with the soldiers and the patients and the Jewish nurses. We happen to be very lucky in our community. I have a great abundance of photos of Jews of Volos because we have members of our community. This is the Negrin family. This is the family of Moises Negrin and from Volos. This is the wedding of Moises and Esther Negrin. Esther actually was born in Yanina, and her family sent her to Volos, not specifically to marry someone there, but to stay with a relative because the family was poor, and they felt she would have a better opportunity of meeting a mate in Volos, which she did. And of course, those are the parents of Maurice and these are the parents of Steve, Anna, and Tina Negrin, and the grandparents of Maurice and Esther Negrin. The saving of the Jews of Volos. Who are the heroes in this story? It's a complicated story, an interesting story, and an unusual story. The great friendship between Rabbi Pesach, who, by the way, has been honored at Yad Vashem for the work that he did in saving the Jewish community of Volos. Not only do they honor non-Jews, but in the rare instances such as this, they also honor Jews. And then on the right, you have the Metropolitan Bishop, Joachim. The two of them were very, very close friends. When word got out, this picture in the middle is a very precious photograph because this is Rabbi Pesach over here. I'm not quite sure who this man is, but these are his sons, both of whom perished in the Holocaust. One who had moved his family to Cavalla and the other one to Drama. The complete story of the saving of the Jews of Volos was that there was a German officer who had the moral courage to come forward and tell the mayor of the city that the Germans were planning to deport the Jews of Volos, much in the same way as they already knew in Volos what the Jews from Salonika had been deported. There were very close relationships between the two cities. The mayor then went to the bishop, who then went to the rabbi. The bishop gave the rabbi a letter that he could give to anyone he met along the way, explaining that he was a teacher and he was going there to teach. Most of the Jews of Volos followed the rabbi into the mountains in Pelion, and that's where they were saved. Asher Mattathias was actually born during the occupation in 1943 and tells a very colorful story of how he was born in a cave during the occupation. He was among those that owe their lives to Greek Orthodox Christians who had the moral courage to do the right thing. This is the Holocaust. Okay. This is the Holocaust Memorial on the right, which was sponsored by Victor Politis, who was living in Manhattan, but who was who had come from Volos. I have some interesting things here that I really shouldn't have put all of this away because the names of the Jews in Volos tell a lot about where they came from. Now we know that there was an influx of Sephardim after 1492, but where did they come from? Well, a popular name was Miranda in Volos, which those Jews came from Nevada. Rosa were Jews that came from Catalonia. There were also Jews from Italy who arrived, and you can see by their surnames, Cesano from Bologna and Recanati from Porto Recanati. There were also Recanatis in Salonika. And then there were Jews from Portugal, Siaki. And of course, there were also the surnames of the indigenous Romano Jews, Politis, which was a Jew who worked in the city, Ipoli, which would have been Constantinople, and Daskalakis, someone who was a teacher. So there was a mixture of Romano and Sephardic Jews in the city. This is the Holocaust Memorial, and it's in a very prominent square, very close to the Jewish neighborhood. A Jewish neighborhood is still there. The synagogue is very much a part of the Jewish neighborhood. Now, these are pictures from the earthquake in Volos, and we have here on the right the Negrin family, and then on the left shows you the extent of the destruction in the city. The synagogue that was destroyed in the earthquake was not the first synagogue. In fact, there were two previous synagogues. The one on the right was the earliest synagogue built in the city, and that was built back in the 1800s. It was destroyed during another earthquake, and then the one on the right was built, and then finally the new synagogue, which we see here, was built by the community with funds from major Jewish philanthropists. There was Baron Hirsch, there were the Rothschilds, and there were also the Alatini brothers who had the flour mill in Salona, who gave funds for the rebuilding of the synagogue. These are the Torah Scrolls within the Ark in Volos. And as you can see, they're a combination of Romano and Sephardic. Over here, how to figure this out. On the right, you have a couple of Torah Scrolls that are in a teak, which would be the Romano style. And on the left, you can see Torahs that are the traditional Sephardic style. The Jewish cemetery in Volos is in very, very good condition and well kept. The community is down to only about 70 members now. A good many of them, after World War II and the establishment of the State of Israel, chose to make Aliyah. And then there were, of course, many that came to the United States with the help of Hayes and the Joint. Cemetery is kept up very well. What's interesting is very much like in Salonika or in the new cemetery, you can see tombstones along the side that were taken from a former cemetery. And most of the time, these are tombstones of the rabbis that they take with them. They never dig up the bodies. Jews bury for eternity. But if the cemetery is going to be abandoned, they take the tombstones of the rabbis with them. And here are some others here. And some of them are very interesting. And I would love to have someone translate these for me, because I have a feeling that some of them are in Ladino and some of them might even be in Judeo-Greco. Again, some more of the tombstones along the wall in Volos. Now we're moving to Trikona, another amazingly colorful city, which is very close to the monasteries of Meteora, and a lot of people stop there on their way to the monasteries. I love this waterfall under the bridge on the left, and the mountains in the back, and you can actually see part of Meteora in the back there. There's a lake or a stream that runs through the city. And they have these great old remnants of the Turkish marketplaces, the bazaar, where you can get fresh fish or fresh fruit. They also have a colorful history of the Plaques, which are shepherds that come down from the mountains when the weather gets bad to graze their sheep and are dressed in very colorful costumes. They also come in Meteora, and I seem to always miss when they're coming when I go there. Not Meteora, Metzevo. Now, until 1881, when Trikona, and by the way, also Volos, became part of modern Greece, it was part of the Ottoman Turkish Empire. This actually was in 1883, when there was another earthquake in the city. This whole area is very prone to earthquakes, and you can see the destruction that took place there. And this old bridge, I love the building of this bridge, how colorful it is, and the reflections in the water are magnificent. Jewish Trikona, I had a fascinating experience there. It wasn't the first time I had gone, but the second time I had gone, I had been taking a group from Bowling Green State University from Ohio, and they were a group of teachers and students who had been involved in the making of a documentary film about survivors from the Holocaust. And one of them happened to come from Trikona. So I get a telephone call from a woman named Heather, who asked me, have you ever heard of Trikona? I said, yes, I had. And she said, thank God, because nobody ever heard of it here in Ohio. Then she told me that Albert Negrin, or Avram Negrin, was one of the subjects in the film, and I said that I knew him. She asked me if I would be their guide in Greece. They were going to Poland and Hungary, where the other subjects in the film had come from, and Albert came from Greece. So they needed someone to guide them in Greece, which was my joy. This brought me into the synagogue in Trikona, and these are the Torah Scrolls there. Again, a combination of Roman Yod and also Sephardic. And then we had this moment. On the right is a man by the name of David Baruch, who is talking to a man by the name of Mattathias Baruch from Trikona. They'd never met before, but David was trying to see if they were related. After David finished talking to him, I explained to Mattathias that we were here because this is the city where Albert Negrin was born, and he unfortunately had recently passed away. At which point Mattathias his eyes started to tear up. And he explained to me that Avram Negrin had told him of what had happened in the camps when Avram's mother took the baby that Mattathias's mother was holding and offered to carry it for her. If that had not happened, Mattathias's mother would have gone to the gas chambers and he never would have been born. He carries the name of the baby that was actually a brother of Albert Negrin, but perished in the camps. This is the list of the names, and I'm sure you remember, Louise, because you were with me on this trip, all the atuns that are on here from Trikona. These are also the other names. And this, again, in Trikona, only a small percentage, about 30% of the Jews perished in the Holocaust. And this is the cemetery in Trikona, which unfortunately we couldn't see when we were there. But Victor Venuzio worked to document the tombstones there, those that he could read the names on, and he put a plaque on them and really created a database so that when people would come to visit, they would be able to find the tombstone. I had prayed the same thing would happen in Yanina. Unfortunately, it has not. And the thing that's interesting is many of these tombstones, he could not read the names of. And the same thing in Yanina with the elements, the inscriptions have worn away. And yet in Israel, there is available, it's not cheap, it's quite costly, the ability to X-ray into a tombstone where you can retrieve the names that are there. So one day when I win the lottery, I'll get one of those machines and we'll be able to uncover the names of all of those that are buried where we can't read the inscriptions anymore. I'm making a stop in Karditsa for a very special reason, because something happened here that is celebrated by the Jews of Trikona, Larissa, and Volos, because the community in a small town that was part of Karditsa extended the greatest gift of all, a sanctuary to save these Jewish families during the Holocaust. These are pictures from Karditsa here. And the resistance was very active in this area of Thessaly. And these are actually Jews that fought in the resistance movement in the mountains outside of Thessaly. This picture here, this is Joseph Parente. This is Victor Venuzio. I have to confess, I don't think I know these two men here, although I think one of them is Mr. Ezra. They had come to Karditsa to unveil a monument to thank the people for what they did in saving Jews. And this is one of the Jews that was saved. His name is Solomon Haji. He was a young kid at the time, but he came back for the ceremony, as did many who had been saved or were the children of those that had been saved. And during the economic crisis, Victor Vannuzio would gather together non-perishables and deliver it to the small town in Karditsa to help those people there, especially the elderly that was suffering because of economic reasons, as a small gesture to pay back for what so many Jews owe their lives to this small town. Moving on to Larissa now, which is actually going to be our last stop on this journey down the coast. And Larissa is a lovely town. If you could see the archaeological ruins over here, there were actually findings of Jewish interest there. And this is a picture of the city itself. This is Moses Magrizos, who was the former president of Larissa, and some of the Remonim from the synagogue. Absolutely magnificently beautiful synagogue, one of the most beautiful in all of Greece, built in 1860. It's called Etz Chaim, which is a Roman Yoke name, and yet in the synagogue, under one roof, there was at one time, there were a number of synagogues in Larissa, but in recent history, there's been one, and those both of Roman Yoke and Sephardic backgrounds have worshipped together. The Jewish community of Larissa was a flourishing community until recently. A couple of years ago, they lost the Jewish school, and now they're in the process of possibly the jeopardy of losing the synagogue. This is a picture of the Azuvi family, the family of Gabriel Azuvi, who was a brother to Judah Azuvi, who perished in Cavalla. And this is also family members of Louise from her family. He was the rabbi in Larissa. And this is a picture of some young Jewish boys bicycling in the city, the Rimonim. And this is the Holocaust Memorial, which is in memory of those Jews from Larissa. It's one of the earliest ones. It was open in 1989. It was unveiled, and there were 235 Jews who were victims of the Holocaust from Larissa. It was a very moving ceremony there. Beri Nachmias, of blessed memory, recited a song that she heard that was sung in the camp to the Sonderkommando as they were taking the bodies from the gas chambers to put into the crematoria. This is the cemetery in Larissa, which is actually in quite good shape. But again, there are always, and you can see here the same thing of putting out the plaques with numbers so that it can be, there's a database that I'm hoping to get our hands on soon. Again, some more tombstones. There's about 300 Jews that still live in Larissa, and as in most of the communities in Thessaly, they had a number of occupations. In Larissa, there was also many who were, they ran horse-drawn taxis, I guess you could call them. They would transport goods and people throughout the city. They weren't porters because they weren't physically carrying the merchandise. They would be in wagons. They also had a number of stores, and they were in, of course, there was a great deal with the textile industry. And then those tradesmen to serve the community itself. Take a deep breath. The picture on the right is the Synagogue of Larissa. The picture on the left is the synagogue as it looks now. The synagogue was in jeopardy of collapsing. The roof was ready to cave in. They stripped down what they could to see what the damage was and brought in specialists. There is over 500, over €500,000 that it will take to fix this. I will be reaching out, the Sephardic Brotherhood will be reaching out of ways that you can contribute either directly to the Jewish community of Ladisa or through the Association of Friends of Greek Jewry here, every cent of which will be sent on to Ladisa. I'm also working with the community there to get possibility of major foundations and money from the EU to help the Jewish community. The synagogue dates back to 1860. So it's about 150 years old. But much in the same way as we almost lost the synagogue on the island of Rhodes due to internal corrosion, the same thing has happened here. So hopefully you people will be generous and give to help save this magnificent synagogue. I'm going to open the floor to questions. I'm putting up the contact information here. For Cavalla the Synagogue and Museum at 280 Broome Street, our website, and my personal email. I want to thank all of you that emailed me after the last presentation with questions that I didn't get to. Before I forget, when I did the last presentation, after I finished, I said, oh my God, somebody asked a question that I could have answered so easily, and I messed it up. The person wanted to know why I'm using the expression Ottoman Turkish Empire. I'm using that expression because there were many Turkish tribes that came down, but it was the Ottoman Turks that founded the empire that we know of as the Ottoman Turkish Empire. So that's why I use that expression. I hope whoever asked me that question last time is here now and that my answer satisfies them. Thank you again. Thank you very much. And Ethan, should I stop sharing now or leave this on?
You can stop sharing or you can leave it up either way.
Okay.
But Marcia, thank you so much for a wonderful part 2 in the series as always. We have some few questions here. Just as a reminder, if you do have a question you want to ask, we'll try to get to as many as we can. But if you do have a question, to please put it into the chat box. We're not going to take audio questions, just don't have the time, unfortunately. One question that I saw repeating quite a bit, and you can probably add some clarity to this, is people were a bit confused of why it looks like in some of the cemeteries people are buried above ground, which is not the case.
No.
Can you explain that?
Okay, we take so much from the non-Jewish world in the foods we eat, the names we give our children, the clothing we wear, and in burial practices. In fact, if you go to Yanara, you would think that they were buried. They use the same style as the Greek Christians used. So where we bury down 6 feet, what you see on the top are actually marble plaques that can be moved. Where the Greeks remove the bones and replace it with the next occupant, we don't do that, but we use the same style of the tombstone. Good question, by the way.
A question here regarding Greek righteous among the nations. Are there a significant number of Greek Christians who hid Jews during the Holocaust?
Yes, I think the number now is over 350, which is really a very, very small number of those that actually did, because in many instances it was more than one family. I think Yolanda Avram Willis expressed it best when she gave the title to the movie, It Was Nothing, It Was Everything. Her family, in fact, her father was president of the Jewish community of Ladisa, and they went to Crete and was saved by a Christian family there. But she expressed the question, who saved us? Was it the baker that gave us a piece of bread when we were starving? Was it the policeman who looked the other way when he knew that our papers were suspect? Was it the family who took us in risking everything, including the life of their own children? For them, it might have been nothing. For us, it was everything. So thank God for those who had the moral courage. I mean, we have in our own synagogue, we have numbers. Saul Kofinas is a prime example, how he and his brother were taken in by a neighbor. And where they couldn't stay in the house, they stayed on the property. But during the day, they would be fed, and they survived. There were many that survived that way.
Maybe you can comment on why the synagogue of Ladisa is in kind of such bad shape. Someone mentioned that they went there recently and it didn't look so bad.
Sometimes, what it looks like on the outside doesn't reflect what's going on the inside. I know when I proposed Kahil Shalom to the World Monument Fund, my good friend Sam Gruber says to me, "Oh, you'll never get it. That synagogue's in too good shape." I said, "Sam, you can't see what's going on internally. I mean, a person could look fantastic on the outside, but do you know what's actually going on inside?" Here it was internal corrosion, that what happened is the roof started to leak, and they started to look for what was causing the leak. And then they realized the roof was in jeopardy of collapsing. And why was it in jeopardy of collapsing? Because those columns holding it up had corroded on the inside, because it was wood surrounded by plaster. So that was the style that they used in creating the synagogue. I mean, it's over 150 years old, so it did hold up pretty well. It was not due to neglect. I mean, I was there quite recently myself, and it looked beautiful, but we're going to lose it if we don't do something. And I know people that I've been in touch with there, Betty Magrizo, she says, we're in tears here. So I promised her whatever I get, even if it's in small amounts, I'll start sending over, just so it gives them some hope that things will get better. So we're going to do what we can here. You know, what else can we do?
Question regarding the community in Sedis. Is there still a synagogue building in Sedis?
No, there's no synagogue building. There's no Jewish community. The community really started to disintegrate with the loss of the railroad there, and many of them started to move out into outlying communities. There's no synagogue there. It has been gone for years. I mean, from the time of the Holocaust, it's been gone. You know, there was also intensive bombing throughout parts of Greece. So a lot, like you take in Salonika, most of the synagogues were lost due to bombing. Mostly by the Italians and the Germans, but in other parts of Greece, you look in the island of Rhodes, most of the bombing there were by the Allies. The same thing in Corfu. So a lot of these synagogues were lost because of that.
Can you comment on who spearheaded the placement of Holocaust memorials in Greek cities and towns that specifically commemorated the Sephardic and Romano Jews?
Okay. It varied from municipality to municipality. For instance, in Yanina, the municipality took it upon themselves, I think it was in 1987, to put up a memorial to its citizens. The same thing with Larissa. Then, as we got on in years, I have to say the Association of Friends of Greek Jewry played a prominent role, because we would complain, you know, how come there's no Holocaust memorial? And so they finally got their act together. And prime example of this is Corfu, which was very late coming to the table because the then president of the community didn't want to upset tourists who were coming to the island by having a prominent Holocaust memorial. So much for that. But no, it was a combination of things in different parts of Greece. In Cavalla, it was again the municipality. You know, you needed the permission of the municipality to put any of these things up. So very often, while the permission was coming, now Victor Venuzio paid for the Holocaust Memorial in Cavalla. Victor Politis paid for the Holocaust Memorial in Volos. So again, sometimes it was private individuals, sometimes it was the Jewish community, and most times it was the municipality.
One last question here. Who today owns the land where the synagogues previously stood or that are marked by plaques?
Okay. I'm going to try to be gentle with this. Okay. In many instances, when there was no longer a Jewish community there, and there was what would be considered Jewish property, the land and the property became the possession of the Central Board of Jewish Communities. In Veria, for instance, the cemetery was sold to the municipality of Veria. The money by the municipality of Veria, the Central Board of Jewish Communities gave them money for the cemetery in exchange for restoring the synagogue in Veria and the Babuta. Castoria, which we're going to go to next week, again, the Central Board of Jewish Communities feeling that there were no really Jews to worship there. The synagogue, beautiful, the Aragon synagogue was torn down, and where you can see You know what's there now because you know what was there before. It was, I felt bad because it's, I understand what they were going through. The reason the Central Board of Jewish Communities was established was to be the legal body for the Jews of Greece and get return of property in many instances where there were people residing in their property. So they would be the ones to take the cases to the court. And as someone in the Jewish community said to me when I was saying, how come you don't have a list of the Jews that return? And he said to me very gently, Marcia, we had more important things to take care of than compiling a list. So that's the sad answer, but I can understand it. They were overwhelmed. When you've lost 87% of your Jewish population, you've lost the people who had the knowledge. Jewish education disappeared in most instances for quite a period of time. And many of those that grew up during those periods, like Saul Kofinas, when his children here in the United States started to go to yeshiva, he started to study about Judaism. He had no Jewish education at all. The important thing was tending to the injured souls, maybe not physical injuries, but emotional injuries of what they had gone through, and trying to ease their way back into a life. And it was quite a burden, considering that there were 10,000 who survived, most of them from the camps, some in hiding, some children who were traumatized in much the same way as if they had been in a camp, to come back to a city where all their friends were gone. Guilt, why did I survive when others did not? It was a lot of stuff to take care of. So if in their way, the Central Board of Jewish Community felt they could use the funds from these Jewish sites to pay for what needed to be done to help the surviving Jews, that was the rationale.
With that, I want to thank Marcia so much for the wonderful second class in this 3-part series. And remind you, we'll be back next week at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. I also want to remind you as well, this is a nonprofit initiative. We could use your support. Starting with our Giving Tuesday campaign tomorrow, we're starting both for KKJ and the Sephardic Brotherhood. If you're interested in supporting us, we'd greatly appreciate it. We are putting the link into the chat right now if you want to direct support as well. And to find out more information on how you can also support the Jewish community in Larissa with their upcoming restoration of their synagogue as well, please feel free to reach out to us as well at info@sephardicbrotherhood.com or at museum@kkjsm.org. We'll be back next week, God willing. Marcia, thank you so much. Thank you all so much for joining us this evening.
Can I say one thing?
Please.
Or you all scream at me. Yes, Yonner, I'll be talking about next week. Castoria, I'll be talking about next week. I will also be touching upon Jewish communities on the islands, such as Corfu, Crete, and Zakynthos, and the island of Kos. So whatever I didn't do in these other two, I will take care. I'm going to finish with Yanada. I have to do that because, as I often say, my roots might be in Salonika, but my heart is in Yanada. So I'll see you next week.
Thank you so much, Marcia. Thank you all so much. Have a wonderful evening.